Greetings, friends, and welcome to my guide on Zurvan Extreme. This encounter is extremely rewarding for having high DPS that includes many phase pushes. I will go into each of the mechanics as we make our way through the encounter, while also mentioning all these pushes as we get to them. Alright, let's get started. Okay, so for phase 1, the first thing you want to do is put down markers like so: A west, C north, B east. These markers won't matter now, but will come in handy later in the fight. You also want to pull the boss from the south or the northwest, because the platform will begin to get smaller starting from the east and working itself around to the south. In this phase, nothing too crazy happens. The boss cleaves and there will be ground AoEs that appear over random party members, including the tank. So be sure to stay stacked up at all times in order to bait these out properly. The cleaves and ground AoEs from the boss deal moderate damage and you can fall off the platform, so be careful when stacking and spreading. This is a timed phase, but DPS is very important. The reason for this is because the more you push in this phase, the more mechanics you will skip for after the platform breaks away. The first push is at 90%, then the second push is at 75%. So this means if you push him to 75% or below in the first phase, you will skip 3 mechanics in the next phase. If you do not push him past 90%, you will get a wave cannon, which I will go over later. If you do not push him past 75 or below, you will get Soar and Demon's Claw. After the ground breaks away and the party lands on the bottom floor, Zurvan will reappear and phase 2 begins. Bear in mind that if you focus targeted Zurvan before this phase, you will lose that focus targeting and have to redo it. I would recommend keeping him face south and in the center to make the upcoming mechanics easier to deal with. Zurvan's HP percentage will determine what mechanic he starts with. If not pushed to 75%, he will do Soar, then Demon's Claw. Soar is a dive bomb style mechanic that dives to the outside edge and then back in. The start of the Soar is based on where the boss is, so try and keep him in the middle for this. When it dives back in, the damage area will be mirrored, so while dodging, try and line yourself up with the opposite side so that on the return dive, you are already in position. While diving, 2 tanks and 4 DPS will be targeted with an AoE dealing moderate damage and applying a stack of fire resistance down. This forces you to spread out and not overlap. Overlapping will result in death. Healers will not get targeted by the fire AoEs. If you solo tank this fight, then 5 DPS and the tank will get targeted. There are 2 different Soar patterns. For pattern 1, this divides the arena into 2 halves. I would suggest putting the tanks on one side with 1 DPS, while the rest of the DPS on the other side. Healers can go to either side they want, but I would recommend splitting them up on each side. If you solo tank this fight, simply have a DPS replace the position of the off tank. As you can see, the position is extremely tight, so be sure to align yourself properly and look all the way across the arena so you are not hit with the return dive. This is what the other pattern looks like. Everyone needs to be equal distance from each other, spacing themselves out along the edge of the arena where the safe zones are. After the dives have resolved, one healer will be targeted with a stack and the other with a marker. The healer with the marker needs to be out of the stack and away from everyone while the party stacks up on the other healer. After Soar is Demon's Claw. This mechanic is a tank buster and party stack. Pull Zurvan slightly back, about 5 or 10 yalms. This attack will do heavy physical damage and knock the tank back about 50% of the arena's length. During the cast, run behind Zurvan so you don't get knocked into the lightning. After the knockback, the boss will begin to charge a shared wave cannon. The first person hit will take high damage, so have the off tank be first in line. The rest of the party will take moderate damage. If you solo tank this, then the DPS will have to sack themselves. Also, if you are solo tanking this and see this mechanic, then I would suggest replacing members of your party, because the point of solo tanking this is to skip this mechanic. Once Zurvan's HP reaches 75%, the next part of the phase begins. A puddle of ice spawns underneath Zurvan. Stepping in the ice inflicts you with a heavy debuff and deals damage over time. You will need to stay out of Zurvan's hitbox while dealing with his mechanics. Biting Halberd is a 270-degree conal attack oriented towards a random target. Pay attention to which direction he is facing and get behind him to dodge this attack. If you fail to avoid this attack, it inflicts moderate damage, applies a vulnerability stack, and has a knockback effect. Southern Cross is an AoE targeted on all players based on their positioning when the cast finishes. Have the party stay stacked together behind the boss and move away once the cast finishes. Southern Cross is always followed by Cleave. Simply have the tank move right and the rest of the party move left. Following Southern Cross, Zurvan will do one of the three mechanics, chosen at random. Biting Halberd, get behind the boss. Cyclocell, get close to the boss. Tail End, get far away from the boss. Upon reaching 60% or after 2 cycles of this phase, Zurvan will become untargetable, disappear, and the add phase will begin. The add phase begins with 4 Thews and 1 Will spawning at the north side of the arena at C marker. While the Thews do little damage, the Will buffs its damage shortly after the spawn. Additionally, the Will has an extremely high crit chance. Healers should expect sudden spike of HP loss from the tank. The second add phase contains 2 Wills at the west, a Wit at the east, and a Wile at the south. The Wit will immediately start casting Mericidian Meteor. The cast time is fairly long, but this add should be focused down first by the party. Do not let it finish its cast. While the party is focusing down the Wit, the tank should grab the 2 Wills at the west and bring them to the Wile. The Wile will start casting a look away mechanic. Failing to look away from the Wile by the time it finishes channeling its ability gives the player the Hysteria debuff. Make sure to position yourself in a way that your back is towards the Wile while attacking other adds. Once the Wile finishes casting the look away mechanic, it will deal ranged magic damage to the player on top of the aggro table. This damage is fairly low. The final add phase contains 1 Wile at north, 3 Thews at east, 1 Will at south, and 1 Wit at west. Each of these adds retains its same mechanics. The tank should grab the Will and the Thews and bring them to the Wile at the north. Just like the previous add phase, the party should burn the Wit first, while dodging the Gaze mechanic from the Wile. Move on to the Wile at north and burn everything there. Once all the adds are killed, you'll move into the final phase of the fight. While the phase change thematic is playing, MP and TP turret and Mage's Ballad will continue to run. It's also important to keep in mind the phase change thematics will fizzle the raise buff. Zurvan begins by randomly assigning 4 players with infinite fire and 4 players with infinite ice debuffs. These debuffs deal continuous dot damage to the entire party throughout the final phase. It deals roughly 1500 points of damage every 3 seconds. Each party member is then tethered to another party member of the same debuff. Players tethered to each other need to remain in close proximity to each other. Straying too far from your tethered partner results in heavy damage over time. Once debuffs and tethers are assigned, the first attack Zurvan uses is called Wave Cannon. A random party member gets a blue marker above their head. After a few seconds, Zurvan fires a line AoE attack towards the target. To handle this mechanic, have the marked target move to the front of the boss to avoid hitting the party members with the beam. The tank should get out of the way of the beam and move back in front after the beam fires. The laser deals moderate damage and applies a bleed. Ideally, only the marked target should get hit and healers need to heal this target through the dot. The next attack Zurvan does is called Tire Fiend. Tire Fiend is a series of 5 physical attacks followed by a Fire 3, all in quick succession. The main tank should be prepared with defensive cooldowns, and the healers should be ready to heal through the damage. Next, Zurvan casts Southern Cross again. This is the same ability as in the second phase of the fight. The party stacks behind Zurvan and dodges the same way as they did before. Party moves left and tank moves right. This time around, there is no longer an ice puddle underneath the boss, allowing more freedom of movement. However, keep in mind that players are still tethered together, including one player tethered to the tank. Since the party moves in a different direction as the tank, it is imperative that the tank's partner remain in melee range in order to remain in close proximity to the tank. Failure to do so results in heavy damage to himself and the tank. Southern Cross is always followed by a cleave, so as long as the tank and the party dodge in different directions, only the tank should get hit by this. The last mechanic in the fight is called Broken Seal. 8 light pillars will appear in one of 3 possible formations chosen at random. 4 of the pillars are red and 4 of the pillars are blue. The objective of this mechanic is to have each party member stand in a pillar whose color corresponds with the color of their debuff. People with fire stand in red and people with ice stand in blue. Each pillar should be occupied by exactly one person. All of this needs to be accomplished without getting far away from your partner whom you're tethered to, so each tethered pair needs to occupy corresponding pillars that are adjacent to each other. All pillars unaccounted for results in high damage and a vulnerability stack to the entire raid. Failure to stand in a pillar when you have a debuff results in heavy dot damage to yourself. Standing in the wrong colored pillar will outright kill you. This will go through in vuln like Hollowed, Living, and Home Gang. This phase can be extremely confusing because same colored pairs might try to go for the same light pillars, or tethered partners might have a different idea and go for the different pillars that aren't adjacent to each other. For that reason, a lot of coordination is required to reliably and consistently resolve this mechanic. Here's how to do it. Remember the waymarkers we put down at the start of the fight? These waymarkers determine starting positions for each tethered pairing. The idea is to have one red and blue pairing start at A and the other 2 pairs at B. There should be 4 players at A and 4 players at B. 3, 2, 1. To determine who goes where, the tank and the person tethered to the tank will always go to A. The other pairing with the same color as the tank will therefore go to B. That way, the same color pairings start at opposite waymarks from each other. We mark the tank with X for Xeno. As for the other color, we designate one person to mark someone with the opposite color debuff as the tank with a circle. The marked players and his tethered partner will go to A with the tank. The other pairing of the same color will therefore go to B. Again, these 2 pairings start at opposite waymarks from each other. To reiterate, when Broken Seal is casting, the tank and his partner go to A, the marked player and his partner go to A, the other 2 pairings go to B. The split same colored pairings to opposite sides in preparation for when the pillars appear. Once the pillars appear, each pairing simply goes to the nearest set of light pillars that correspond to their colors. Identify which pillars are closest to you and stand in the pillars accordingly. There is one other variant. If 2 sets of pillars are equally close to you, prioritize moving clockwise, because you start opposite of the same color pairing. They will also move clockwise to the opposite pillars as you and your partner. GG easy. To recap, move to the closest pillars of your corresponding color. If they are equidistant, prioritize moving clockwise. Once everyone is in the correct pillars, Zurvan will begin casting one of the Phase 2 mechanics, Sickle, Tail End, or Biting Halberd. The mechanic he chooses is determined by the formation of the light pillars. If the light pillars are close to the center, he will do Tail End, so get ready to move out. If the light pillars are close to the edge, he will do Sickle, so get ready to move in. If the light pillars are in a diamond formation, he will do Biting Halberd, so get ready to be behind the boss. Once the mechanic is completed, Zurvan will cleave the tank and then repeat the same final phase sequence starting with fire and ice debuffs, then wave cannon, then Tire Fiend, then Southern Cross, then Broken Seal. You just gotta do it all again. After 2 rotations, Zurvan goes into Soar. Upon returning from Soar, Zurvan does another Demon's Claw. From here, Zurvan repeats from the beginning of the final phase until he dies or enrages. Keep doing the mechanics, keep your DPS up, and Zurvan will go down. Well guys, that's all I got. I hope this guide was helpful and will lead to some sweet first clears. Peace guys.